All right, guys, to start this week, we are actually going to grade a few problems that you would have done last week. So the very first thing that I need you to do is open up your SAB to lesson 7-2. My guess is you should be on, sorry, Diet Coke can falling over, shocker. I think you need to be on page 232 if my answer key is the same as your book. So let's start there. I'm just going to breeze through and give you answers. I'm not going to explain on these ones, and then the rest of them I will. Okay, so 9, 10, and 11 wanted you to compare to see which statement was true, and that should be to the left, and then to the right, and then to the left. Okay, and then for 12, again, all I'm going to do is just kind of give you the answers. Let me make my pen a little skinnier. There we go. So A is 1/3. B is 2 options. You could either have done 5/3 or 1 2/3. My preferred answer would be that one right there. Letter C is 10/3 or 3 1/3. And then row D is 2/6. And then E is 10/6 or 1 4/6. And then F is 26. Or what also would be 3 2/6. And then finally G is 3/9. And H is 15/9 or 1 6/9. And then finally I is 30/9, or rather 3 and looks like 3/9. Okay? Okay, so this is the next one. Again, this is one you probably did on your own, but I want to grade it with you because it was kind of tricky, especially because this number line is not actually now I'm wondering if maybe I didn't have you do this one. I don't remember, so it doesn't matter. Excuse me. So what I want you to do now is work on this one with me, but I do want to show you that this number line is kind of split up in a little bit of a different way, because you can see that this line is split up into tenths. We could also figure out how to split this line into half, and we could also even split up this line into fifths. So let me explain to you how that can happen. So basically, we want to figure out first between 0 and 1 how many jumps there are. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So technically the line is for sure tenths because you can cut it all up that way. But look, if I skip a couple of these numbers, I can actually show you how we would then also count by fifths. So if I went every other, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And you can also notice that those are raised a little bit to show you that it's every other one. And then finally, the last one, you should be able to do this on most number lines, is you should be able to split it in half. So basically, if I had 10, 5 would be halfway between 10. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll even mark that one a little bit. That right there would have been 5 on that side and 5 on that side to make it so that your fractional part or your share could be halves, or number over 2. Okay, so now with that being done, we can kind of just come through here and try to enter in our answers for these problems as far as where they were on the number line. So letter A was supposed to be 1/5. So that's the one where we counted every other. And so that's going to end up being right there. And I'm going to label that on top with an A. Okay, and then B wants you to count by tenths, which should be the easiest. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this one right here should be B, which would be 7/10. And then C gets us off into past 1. So I'm going to skip all the ways between 0 and 1. And now I know my answer is going to be somewhere between this 1 and 2. And it's going to be 2/5. So remember, that's the one where you're skipping every other line. So this would be 1 1/5. And this would be 1 2/5. So my letter C would be right there. Okay. Before I go any further, I do want to let you know you could have labeled all of these, and in fact it probably wanted you to, but that's a lot of work for me to do on this screen, and also because of time. So I'm just kind of showing you very briefly what they look like, but if this isn't making total sense, I would recommend actually labeling this entire line, and that may help you. Okay, remember that 2/10 would be the same as 1/5, and that 5/10 would be the same as 1/2. So that's kind of the way that that could work. Okay, let's look at D. D is 2.5. So I know that my answer is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3, and it tells me that it's half. So I should be looking for right smack in the middle of that, which would be right there. And so I'm going to label that with D for 2.5. Okay, let's look at E. It's 3 3/10. So again, I'm going to be somewhere between 3 and 4, and then it's 3/10. So 1, 2, 3/10 would be right there, and that should be letter E. Not C, that's an E. And then letter F is 4 2/5. So I know again that's going to be somewhere between 4 and 5. And then 2/5 is going to be 1/5, 2/5. So that's going to be right there. Label that with an F. G is 4 9/10. So that's still going to be between 4 and 5. And 9/10 is going to be pretty much way there at the end. I'll make that a letter G. And then now finally H is 5.5. So again, I'm going to find halfway between 5 and 6, which will be right there. And I will label that with an H. Okay? So let's get to the part that I really wanted to focus on today. This is the reason that I broke this lesson up into 2 different parts, because benchmarks, can be a little bit confusing. So now I think you should be on page 233. And again, it's still lesson 7-2. So I broke this one apart upon 2 days. Okay? So benchmark fractions are really helping you estimate. It's something that we do in almost every part of math, but with fractions it can be a little bit trickier. So what we want to do is we want to estimate. And really what they're doing first for you is asking you to estimate to 0 or 1. So that should be pretty easy. We're just trying to decide, is my fraction going to be way closer to 0 or is it going to be way closer to 1? So let's look at a fraction like 1/4. Well, this line isn't split up into fourths, but I could make this line be split up into fourths. So you figure 1, 2, 3 fourths right there. And it says 1/4, which would be right here, which is obviously way closer to 0. So I'm going to write down a 0 to show that that's closer to nothing. Okay? And then 3/4, that would be 1, 2. My 3/4 would be right here, and that's definitely closer to 1. So I'm going to write that down as a 1. And then 7/8, same deal. I'm actually going to show you this in 2 different ways. One thing I could do is I could actually split this line up a little further and turn it into eighths. And then, because look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8/8 is 1. But what I could do instead, what I could do first is see that this 7/8 right here is obviously super close to 1. But there's something else I want you to notice about your actual fraction here. Do you notice how close 7 is to 8? Anytime you have a fractional part where your number is really close to the denominator, that's obviously going to round up to be 1. For example, if I had something like 9/11ths, well, I don't know much about 11ths. 11ths are really hard to imagine, but I do know this. 9's pretty darn close to 11, so I could assume that that's going to be really close to 1. Okay? All right, for 17, 18, and 19, it wants you to use these symbols to make each statement true. And again, we're just going to see, are they closer to 0 or are they closer to 1? So let's look at 17. We've got 5/8 and we've got 11/12. Well, 11/12 right away kind of stands out to me because 11 is really close to 12. So I think this one's actually really close to 1. Now, I actually want to talk you through 5/8. It's not actually what the little assignment shows you today, but you guys are smart, and I want to show you something that's going to make this way easier. When I see 5/8, another thing that I can ask myself is what would make a half? What would be half of my denominator share? So what would half of 8 be? That would be 4. So if I were going to have a half as my fraction, but I was dealing in eighths, it would be 4/8. So what do I notice about 5/8? 5/8 is really close to 4/8. So if I were to be estimating here, I would say that 5/8 is really close to a half. So because of that, 1 is obviously going to be greater than a half. That actually works perfectly for this one right here, 7/12. Well, what would half of 12 be? That would be 6. And 7/12 is pretty close to 6/12. So I would go ahead and estimate that to be around a half. And then 1/8, just the opposite of 7/8. Do you see how close 7 is to 8? Well, look at this is as far away as you possibly can be from 8. And so that makes me think that that's really close to 0, which would then mean that half is going to be bigger. And then for 3/8 and 1/6, again, 3/8, we already talked about this earlier, but 4/8 is pretty close to a half. So would 3/8. So I'm going to estimate that to be pretty close to 1/2. Oops, that's funny. I just opened up the Microsoft Store. And then 1/6, same deal. 1 is as far away as you can get from 6, so I think that's going to be pretty close to 0, and so I'm going to tell you that half is greater than 1/6. Okay, so that's the big thing to know about your benchmark fractions. It is all about estimation. The most common ways to estimate, and the ways that I want you to do today, are I want you to estimate to 0, to a half, or to a whole. So the last part of this assignment is talking about a recipe to make sure you have about enough of the amounts to make whatever you're trying to make. Now, obviously, when you bake, you want to use exact, but if you were maybe looking in your pantry to see if you needed to go buy some more supplies, estimation is a great thing to use. So it says, the list below shows a variety of cooking ingredients and amounts. So these are your ingredients and amounts, C equals cup. And you've got these 2 different kinds of flour. You've got sugar, cornstarch, oat bran, and water. Sounds like maybe they're making some oatmeal cookies or something. So this says, decide if each amount is closer to a half a cup, 1.5 cups, or 2 cups. And then that's what we would write on this line. So we're trying to decide if it's closer to 1/2 cup, to 1.5 cups, or to 2 cups. So that's kind of what we're working with here. So let's start first with our wheat flour. We've got 1 5/8. Well, I want you to use that same trick we just talked about a little earlier. 5/8 is going to be really close to a half because 4/8 is equal to a half. So because of that, I think that this wheat flour right here is going to be 1.5. And it looks like we should label it with C for cups. Okay, then come over here to your white flour. We've got 1 5/6. Well, we're going to use that trick where 5 is really close to 6, so I would go ahead and round that up to 1 whole, and then you're basically just adding those two together. What's 1 plus 1? That would be 2. So I think that my white flour is going to be right around 2 cups. For the sugar, it says 1 1/8 cups. That's funny. I'm looking to see. This one doesn't even give you an option to round to only 1 cup. That's weird. Well, I'm gonna go rogue because Mrs. Glassy is the worst. I think that I'm going to tell you what I think because I don't agree with my answer key there. All right, sugar, I guess if we're doing the directions, I can give you both answers. But if I'm really looking at this, 1/8 is really close to nothing. So I think that this is about, oh, I know why they did it. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. All right, so 1/8 cup is going to be basically nothing. So that would be right around 1 cup. But I'm going to tell you why they jumped this up to 1.5 cups, which is technically their answer. Because in a recipe, you don't want to have not enough. So it would be not such a bad idea to kind of round up a little bit. Okay. So, I like 1 cup as my answer, but if you like 1.5 cups, that's fine too. Okay. And then cornstarch is 3/8 of a cup. Again, 4/8 would be 1/2, and that's pretty darn close. So I would estimate that to be 1/2 of a cup. And then for your oat bran, 4 is really darn close to 5. So that means that I'm going to round that up to 1. And 1 plus 1 is 2. So that's 2 cups. And then your water, 2/6 of a cup. Well, what's half of 6? That would be 3. And 2/6 is pretty close to 3/6. So I would say that's right around a half. So I'm going to write that down as a half a cup. Okay. There's only one more little part of this. It says decide which ingredient represents a greater amount. So we're going to use the amounts that we just estimated, which is right here, to kind of help us figure these out. So sugar or water, which one is going to represent the greater amount? I'm going to write down the S because 1 is definitely going to be greater than half. Okay. And then for sugar or wheat flour, well, wheat flour was right about 1.5 cups, and I liked it to be about 1 cup. So we're going to say that that wheat flour is more. And then cornstarch or sugar. Well, cornstarch was half a cup, and we said sugar was about a cup, so sugar will be more. And then we've got wheat flour or white flour. Well, wheat flour only had 1.5 cups, and white flour had 2 cups. So white flour, I guess I need to write white flour. We'll have more there. And then sugar or oat bran. So here's your sugar, which was 1 cup, and then your oat bran. So I'm going to say OB for oat bran. And then finally, oat bran or white flour. oat bran versus white flour, they're pretty much equal. So I would put them down there as equal. Okay, real quick, because I only have 20 seconds left. We did all of these SAB pages together, so that is not an option for you. So your two options are either to do, you can either do 7-2 in your homework journal, or you can go back to the weekly plan and see. I would actually probably like that because there are going to be some good benchmark fraction lessons in IXL, okay? Come to the office hours if you need any help, guys.